When God made us, made humankind, we were made in God's image. You know that, right? But God also put something inside of us that's different from the rest of creation. Exactly what that thing is hard to describe or define, but it sets us apart from the wonders, many wonders of God's creation. And maybe to put a little bit of a sharper point on it, there are certainly things that humankind possesses that other parts and beings in God's creation don't, like the ability to reason, to think independently, to create other things out of God's creation, to explore and adapt to other environments, to live beyond just our natural instincts and contemplate literally our own mortality. Maybe the thing that starkly sets us apart is our capacity to question things, to wonder, to suppose, to imagine, and to dream, or just to be curious. I don't know, maybe that's the biggest difference between us and other parts of God's creation, is that we were born with curiosity. Sometimes our curiosity makes or brings about great things, sometimes not so much. But our curiosity makes us question things, and for the most part, we have the innate ability to figure things out. As a species, and especially in our American culture, we love solving mysteries. And in almost every area of our lives, we want to know the who, what, when, where, how, and then the really big one, the why, of virtually everything. Now, a little side note here, sometimes we want to know all the details even when it's none of our business. But that's the way we are. But you know what I mean. If traffic is slow or stuck, we want to know who's holding it up. What happened? Is it an accident, or when did this incident take place? Where is it? How far up in front of us is it? How did it happen? Why did it happen? Whose fault was it? Maybe you're shopping at Tom Thumb or Kroger or even Costco or some of those kind of places, and you're going to find something that you normally get. It's something that you regularly buy, but it's not where it's supposed to be. They moved it. And you're irritated, and you want to know, who authorized this change? What happened to make the change in location necessary? Why did they move the item? Or when did they move the item? Where is it now? How do I find the new location? And why in the world did they move it in the first place? You know. Our curiosity doesn't always need to go through all those steps. It depends on the situation. For example, maybe your daughter calls to tell you that she's pregnant. You know who. You want to know maybe the when, and maybe even the where the birth is going to take place is important. The how is kind of a given. And most of the time you know why, but not always. But let's face it, we all wonder why. And that question becomes even bigger and more difficult sometimes, especially when things happen that we think shouldn't happen. And let's face it, there are lots of things going on in our world, and frankly in our lives, that we can't help but have a lot of questions about and question why. Now, for the most part, down through history and even in our lives today, we can pretty much figure out answers to a lot of questions. The who, what, when, where, how. But that why is a real mystery. I mean, for example, archaeologists and historians can pretty much chart the progression of the human race down through history, who the people were, what they did to carve out an existence, where they moved from one place to another, why they were where they were at certain times, and why they left that place, how they got here and there, and how they survived. But the why behind all those answers, why did they do the things that they did next, those are mostly educated guesses. And I don't think that we're much different than that. When we don't get all the answers that we need, we settle for our best guess. And still, though, we wonder why. A good example of that question of why, some of you know that coffee is one of my favorite foods. Maybe it's one of your favorite foods too. But have you ever heard of civet cat coffee? It's called Kopi Luwak. It's known as civet coffee. It's a coffee that consists of partially digested coffee cherries, which have been eaten and then, expelled by the Asian palm civet. The cherries are fermented as they pass through the civet's intestines, and after being expelled along with other waste matter, the little beans are collected. Producers of the coffee beans argue that process improves by two mechanisms. One, by selection, where civet cats only choose to select certain coffee beans, and then digestion, where biological or chemical mechanisms in the animal's digestive tracts alter the composition of the coffee cherries. Now, the point in this is, by the way, you can buy this coffee. You can order it on eBay or Amazon. It's about $100 a pound. And I think it's pretty fascinating, but I have questions. The biggest one is maybe, why did someone see this whole process and think, those coffee beans are better than the ones I have at home? Why? That question covers a lot of ground, which brings us to probably the biggest why question of all. Why do bad things happen to good people? Maybe the expanded versions, why do bad things happen? And to put an even sharper point, why do I do bad things? Dr. Robert Schuller of the famed Crystal Cathedral in Los Angeles, I think, gives a good attempt at an answer. He wrote, "Why do innocent people get brutally murdered? Why do people suffer? Where is God when terrible, senseless acts of violence happen? Tragedies are a part of life that hit us in the gut, reminding us that our time on earth is fleeting. We don't know how or when it'll be gone, and it can be gone in an instant. A discourse that's circulated forever is that of good versus evil, and God's allowing bad things to happen to innocent people. I believe it'll be talked about until the end of time. But God did not create puppets. He made us as individuals with free wills, and since we have the freedom to choose, there will always be those who choose evil over good. And what happens to good people when bad things happen? Well, if there was no disease, there'd be no creative minds to work on eradicating diseases. If there were no life-threatening accidents, there'd be no emergency room surgeons to operate and save lives. If there were no dangers, there would be no safety measures created by humans to keep us safe. God created us with the intellect for self-improvement, to build, construct, and secure our environment, making Earth better. It's what being human is all about. In our ambition, though, we forget the foundation of faith and love. Our innate human instinct can turn to fear and hate, which produces destruction, war, and evil." Pretty wise words. It's not bad. It doesn't really answer the question. But it's a nice, it's okay. A nice perspective. In the book of Job, chapter 31, verse 35, Job demands an answer to the question why. Job wants to take God to court to hear God's testimony when he says, "Oh, that I had someone to hear me. I sign now my defense. Let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser put his indictment in writing. Surely I would wear it on my shoulder. I would put it on like a crown. I would give him an account of my every step. I would present it to him as a ruler." The verses in this morning's text are the beginning of God's answer, and it continues pretty much for about 4 chapters to the end of the book. And at the end of God's response, Job is speechless. But how did Job come to this point where he was willing to say, "Let the Almighty answer me"? Job's question really is born out of a particular framework for understanding the world. It was a theory that was shared by ancient Israel to the nth degree and most of the surrounding cultures, and truthfully today we see it a lot. According to this framework, those who live a good life and are obedient to God's commands will be rewarded with good fortune, health, wealth, and other blessings. Basically, you put the coin of good works and righteous living in the slot, and out drops the candy bar of a life of ease and blessing. However, those who sin and disobey God's commandments will meet misfortune, illness, poverty, and other unpleasant things in life. This framework, this legalistic worldview of morality that's based on right and wrong, was considered in those days, and oftentimes now, as the baseline of justice. People get what they deserve, and they should. That's the way we want, except when it's us. You know, we don't necessarily want what we deserve, but when it's other people, that's the way it should be. But when tragedy strikes, as it does in everyone's life, the only consolation is found in the belief that the outcome is just. If you hold that view, then you have to believe that the victims just deserve the punishment in some way. Job had lived and breathed this worldview and this understanding of God his whole life, and he had been an exceptionally good man, following all of God's commands. And then tragedy strikes. Chaos shows up in force. Thanks to a deal struck between God and Satan, Job loses everything. His flocks are stolen, his servants are murdered, his children killed, and his health ruined, and yet Job is innocent. As Job sits among the ashes of his former life with nothing but a broken piece of pottery to scratch his leprosy, all the evidence that would suggest that his former worldview was right is not good. He still suffers. And in his desperation, he demands to know why he must suffer in spite of his innocence. He puts God on trial. He states his case and demands, "Let the Almighty answer me." Now, Job's question is our question too. We all know chaos on some level or another. We all have things in our lives that we barely dare to name out loud, doubts and fears that we only whisper when we're alone or maybe on sleepless nights. That question of why. Why did these things happen? Why did I contract this disease or condition? Why is there war? Why can't we find some modicum of peace on earth? Why did I do this or that when I knew better? Why? And God answers. The scripture that we read out of the whirlwind, God replies, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you must know." One of the great examples of God's sarcasm in the Bible. Surely you know. Our reading goes on only through those first 11 chapters, and God's response goes on, as we said, for about 4 chapters more. And it's really a beautiful and kind of almost a poetic liturgy. God describes everything from the birth of creation and the forming of the seas to the movement of the stars, the patterns of rain, and even the way wild animals behave. He goes into incredible detail. Basically, God says to Job, your categories are just too small. You think in terms of a courtroom and individual justice, and I think in terms of the cosmos. Your human theories cannot possibly capture the complexity of the universe I created, and they'll never contain or even begin to understand the chaos, because chaos is a part of creation as surely as crocodiles in the Nile. Barbara Brown Taylor, gifted communicator, many of us have read, made this observation: Job's question was about justice. God's answer is about omnipotence. And as far as I know, that's the only answer human beings have ever gotten about why things happen the way they do. God only knows, and none of us is God. At the end of the day, why is the hardest question, especially when we ask it of God. For Job, though it was an awakening, his blinders fell off, and he says in chapter 42, verse 5, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. What Job learns is that despite the existence of chaos, of bad things, of undeserved things, of pain and loss, God's creation will support and sustain. Job's question is never really answered. He doesn't get a detailed explanation. Instead, he gets a vision that assures him that the world rests on a secure foundation. He realized at the end of this ordeal what the Apostle Paul shared with Timothy in 2 Timothy 1, and therefore I suffer as I do, but I am not ashamed, for I know whom I believed, and I am sure that he is able to guard until that day what's been entrusted to me. I think for me, Job's words are more to the point, as he said, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. Or to paraphrase in the Tracy Ebarb version, my faith was based on what I had read and thought I understood, but now that I've met the author of those words, I get it. In the face of chaos and uncertainty, it's important to remember that questioning why is okay. We can't help it, and it's all right to do it. God's big enough to handle the questions. But we can also trust in the one who ultimately rules the chaos, because chaos is going to come. When pain and loss and tragedy and chaos in general visits our lives, may God give us a vision like Job, a vision that assures us that in spite of the chaos, the world rests on a secure foundation. Amen.